25 dead Frenchmen for every fallen Englishman. 3 dukes dead. 6 counts massacred. 90 barons drowned in armor. In a single October afternoon of 1415, 6,000 starving archers erased French nobility from the face of the earth. The answer wasn't courage or training. It was 60 pounds of steel and a week of rain. What you're about to witness isn't just a battle. It's the day medieval cavalry drowned in mud. It's the moment Welsh peasants with wooden bows proved that physics and terrain can slaughter all the honor and tradition in the world. And it all began with a desperate retreat through occupied France. We're in the autumn of 1415. The 100 Years' War has been devouring Europe for 78 years. Henry V of England has just landed in Normandy with 6,000 men, most of them sick, starving, exhausted. The plan was simple. Capture some ports, strengthen the English position, then return home before winter. But nothing went as planned. Dysentery devastated the English army. Weeks of sieges exhausted their supplies. Now Henry is in desperate retreat toward Calais, the last port controlled by the English. 160 miles of enemy territory, 6,000 exhausted soldiers carrying minimal equipment, and behind them, the largest army France had ever assembled. Between 15,000 and 25,000 French cavalry, the cream of European nobility. Men covered in 60 pounds of plate armor, mounted on the finest war horses on the continent. The Constable of France is there. The Admiral of France is there. 3 dukes, 6 counts, 90 barons, 2,000 knights of noble lineage. This isn't just an army. It's the complete catalogue of French aristocracy, gathered to crush the English invasion once and for all. The French intercept Henry near the village of Agincourt in the Pas de Calais, northern France. They block the road to Calais. They surround the English in a recently plowed field, squeezed between 2 forests. The trap is sprung. The English have nowhere to run. Battle is inevitable. And the numbers are absurd. 6,000 English against up to 25,000 French. 4 to 1 in the best scenario. In the worst, more than 4 to 1. The numerical advantage is overwhelming. But there's something the French haven't realized yet. Something about to turn all that expensive armor into steel coffins. It had rained for an entire week before the battle. A week of constant downpours transforming freshly plowed fields into deep swamps. The soil, already loosened by preparation for planting, absorbed gallons upon gallons of water. The earth became a viscous, sticky mass that sucks in everything it touches. In some places, the mud is nearly 2 feet deep. In others, almost 3 feet. Imagine trying to walk through quicksand while wearing 60 pounds of metal. Every step sinks. Every movement requires brute force against the suction. Your legs start burning after 30 feet. After 150 feet, your muscles are trembling, and the French are going to have to cross more than 600 feet of this mud, under a rain of arrows, carrying the weight of complete plate armor. The math is brutal. Heavy armor plus deep mud equals a death sentence by immobility. And Henry V realized this before any French commander did. Let's understand the actual composition of the forces. On the English side, 6,000 men total. 4,500 are English and Welsh archers, 75% of the entire army. Men without heavy armor, wearing leather or simple cloth, armed with 6-foot longbows. The remaining 1,500 are men-at-arms and light infantry, support troops. But the true English combat power lies with the archers. On the French side, between 15,000 and 25,000 men. The vast majority is heavy cavalry and elite infantry, all wearing complete plate armor, sealed helmets, full body protection, armor articulated at the joints. They're practically invulnerable. On dry ground. But they're not on dry ground. They're about to enter a muddy swamp under an arrow bombardment that will last for hours. Henry positions his archers with military precision. He chooses slightly elevated terrain. Not much. Just enough to give the archers a clear view of the entire killing field. The forests on both sides create a natural funnel. The French will have to advance in compressed formation, packed against each other, creating a dense and irresistible target. The archers drive sharp stakes into the ground in front of them. Makeshift barriers against cavalry charges. Then they position themselves in staggered lines, ready to lose 6 to 12 arrows per minute. Per archer. Do the math. 4,500 archers, firing 10 arrows per minute on average, are 45,000 arrows cutting through the air every 60 seconds. A a storm of flying metal raining down on a confined space. The French look at the battlefield and see guaranteed victory. They have the numbers, they have the armor, they have the nobility, the prestige, centuries of tradition in cavalry supremacy. Peasants with bows cannot defeat knights in full armor. It's impossible. It goes against every rule of medieval warfare. But there's a problem. Those knights will have to cross 200 meters of mud that sucks and drags, under constant arrow bombardment, while carrying 60 pounds of steel that should protect them, but now has become dead weight. The armor that makes them invulnerable in close combat will become the very cause of death. Because when you fall in the mud wearing 60 pounds of metal, you don't get up on your own. And when other knights fall on top of you, you sink, and sink, and sink. Henry knows this. He saw the mud, calculated the weight, understood the brutal physics of what is about to happen. He doesn't need to defeat 25,000 Frenchmen in direct combat. He only needs to make the mud and the weight of the armor do the work for him. The morning of October 25th, 1415 dawns cloudy and humid. The rain has stopped, but the field is waterlogged. Pools of water mix with thick mud. The smell of wet earth and horse sweat fills the air. On one side, 6,000 hungry, sick, exhausted Englishmen. On the other, 25,000 rested, well-fed, confident Frenchmen. The French prepare for the charge. Heavy cavalry in front, elite infantry right behind. The strategy is time-tested. Crush the enemy with the weight of the charge, break the lines, massacre the archers before they can do real damage. It's the tactic that worked for centuries. It's the tactic that made French cavalry the most feared in Europe. But today, this tactic will transform into collective suicide. The French knights mount their war horses, adjust their armor, lower their visors. The signal is given. The charge begins. And in the first 30 feet, everything seems normal. Horses trotting, armor gleaming even under the gray sky, lances pointed forward. It's a magnificent sight, terrifying. Thousands of tons of metal and muscle advancing in unified formation. Then the horses start to sink. The front hooves plunge into the mud. The horses stumble. Some fall. The knights try to force the animals forward, but each step is a struggle. The momentum of the charge disappears in seconds. What should be a devastating gallop becomes a slow, torturous walk through a mud pit that shows no mercy. And it's exactly at that moment that the English archers release the first barrage. It's not the swish sound from movies. It's a muffled, terrifying sound. The noise of 27,000 arrows tearing through the air and piercing flesh and metal. Arrows that don't necessarily need to penetrate the steel plates. They only need to find the gaps. Visors, armpits, throats. A French count is struck in the face. He falls forward. The 60-pound armor, designed to deflect swords, now functions as an anchor. He tries to rise, but the weight of steel combined with the grip of the mud makes movement impossible. He dies drowned in 6 inches of muddy water, surrounded by thousands of comrades who can't help him without falling themselves. This is the mathematics of mud. One man falls and brings down 3. Those 3 become a barricade that traps 10. Just 100 yards away, the French formation stops being an army and becomes a mass of panicked metal. Half-ton war horses collapse, trapping their riders in the mud. The advance stops completely, and the arrows keep falling, without stopping, without mercy. The first French knights, the few who managed to cross 200 yards of mud and arrow hell, finally reach the English lines. They raise their swords. They prepare themselves to transform all that agony into victory. To prove the armor was worth it. That French nobility is still superior. But they're so exhausted from the walk that they can barely lift their weapons. Their legs tremble under the weight of mud-soaked armor. They can barely breathe inside the helmets. And the English archers simply drop their bows, pick up axes and war hammers, and advance. Because here's the brutal truth about armor. It protects against cuts. It doesn't protect against blunt force trauma. And a war hammer swung by a Welsh archer who spent his entire life pulling 180-pound draw-weight bows has more than enough strength to crush steel. To turn a helmet into a metal prison. To break bones through the armor without ever penetrating it. The first French knights who reach the lines die in seconds. Not in honorable combat. In brutal, efficient executions. Hammer blows to the head. Axe strikes to the backs of knees. knives thrust through visors. The archers are not fighting with honor, they are culling targets. And behind those first knights comes the second wave, and the third. But each wave is weaker than the last, slower, more exhausted, easier to kill. It's here that the French commanders begin to realize the mistake. The Constable of France, the supreme commander of the French army, is somewhere in the middle of the compressed mass of knights. He can see what's happening, can see his men sinking, can see the English line holding, can see that the battle is already lost. But he can't retreat, because retreat would mean admitting defeat, would mean abandoning thousands of men already committed to the charge, would mean dishonor. And for French nobility, dishonor is worse than death. So he advances, and dies. The Constable of France falls 50 yards from the English lines, an arrow through the neck. He sinks into the mud still alive. It takes 5 minutes to die. No one knows exactly what killed him, if it was the arrow, if it was drowning, if it was the weight of other knights falling on top of him while he tried to rise. Does it matter? He's dead. The supreme commander of France. Dead in farm mud 50 yards from the victory he was certain would be his. And then the Admiral of France falls. And then 3 dukes. And then counts. And then barons. And then knights. One after another, French nobility is being erased from the battlefield. Not by superior tactics, not by English courage, but by simple and relentless physics. Armor plus mud equals death. Multiplied by 54,000 arrows per minute, divided by 0 meters of ground gained. Now it's been 2 hours since the French charge began. 2 hours. And the English line hasn't moved back a single meter. Because it didn't need to. Because mud and arrows did all the work. The field between the two forces no longer looks like a field. It looks like a cemetery. It looks like a pile of metal scrap. Because that's what it's become. Hundreds of French knights are dead or dying in the mud. Hundreds more are trapped, unable to move under the weight of their own armor. Dead and dying horses create obstacles that force the knights still standing to swerve, to stumble, to fall. And the arrows don't stop. Because the archers have tens of thousands of arrows. Because there's no reason to stop. Because with every minute that passes, the math gets more favorable to Henry V. The French have lost perhaps 6,000 men by now, half of them dead, half trapped and defenseless. The English have lost perhaps 50 men in 2 hours of intense combat. The casualty rate is 100 to 1 in favor of England, and getting worse every minute. But Henry V is not celebrating. He is watching, calculating, because there are still 15,000 French soldiers. There is still the possibility of a second wave. There is still the risk that the tide could turn. But as he watches, as the minutes pass, as mud and arrows continue doing the work, something becomes clear. French nobility isn't just losing this battle. It is being exterminated, systematically, irreversibly. In a single muddy afternoon near an obscure village in northern France, the entire power structure of the French army is sinking into mud. The leadership of all France decimated. Thousands of knights dead or captured. This is not just a military defeat. It is a generational erasure. It is the physical elimination of the French warrior class. It is the destruction of the nobility that commanded armies, governed provinces, defined strategy for centuries. And it's happening not because the English are stronger, but because Henry V understood something fundamental about war that the French did not. Armor only works if you can move. Terrain matters more than numbers. And physics doesn't care about honor, tradition, or nobility. By sunset over Agincourt that evening, 10,000 Frenchmen will be dead or captured, and Henry V will have proven something that will change warfare forever. That peasant archers on favorable terrain can destroy noble knights in plate armor. That the age of chivalrous cavalry has ended. That projectile weapons are the future. That medieval warfare died in the mud of Agincourt. But first, the massacre must end. And there are still thousands of Frenchmen trapped in the mud. Trapped, defenseless, waiting to find out if they'll be captured for ransom or executed where they stand. And that decision rests in the hands of Henry V, a 28-year-old king who just turned certain defeat into one of the most devastating victories in military history. A man who understood that sometimes the best weapon isn't steel. It's mud, it's terrain, it's making the environment fight for you. The trap worked perfectly. French nobility is sinking, and the next few minutes will determine whether this becomes a defeat or an apocalypse. The decision is made in minutes. There will be no mercy. There will be no ransoms. The Frenchmen trapped in the mud are executed where they stand. Because Henry V cannot keep prisoners. He doesn't have enough men. He doesn't have provisions. And he's still days away from Calais and safety. So the Welsh archers come down the hill for the third time. Not to shoot arrows, but to finish what they started. With daggers, with hammers, with their bare hands, if necessary. The silence that falls over the battlefield is disturbing. There are no more battle cries. There are no more sounds of steel on steel. Only the muffled groans of men dying in the mud, and the soft sound of rain that finally begins to stop. When the sun sets over Agincourt on the 25th of October, 1415, the battlefield is a sea of armor and mud, bodies stacked on top of one another. Men sunk to their chests in waterlogged earth. Noble banners trampled in the dirt. And the numbers, when they are finally counted, are devastating. 10,000 Frenchmen dead or captured. From a force that began with 15 to 25,000 men, 2/3 simply vanished in 3 hours. Some killed by arrows, many suffocated under the weight of their own armor, others crushed under piles of their own comrades. Among the dead are 3 French dukes, 6 counts, 90 barons. The Constable of France, the supreme commander of the entire French army, is dead. The Admiral of France is dead. Approximately 2,000 knights, the warrior elite of French nobility, are dead or captured. An entire generation of French military leadership was eliminated in a single afternoon. The men who were supposed to command armies for the next 20 years are sunk in the mud of a farm near Agincourt. And the English losses? Less than 400 men. Less than 7% of their force. Most of them killed in the first impact of the French cavalry charge, before the mud did its work. The casualty ratio is 25-1 in England's favor. 25 Frenchmen dead for every Englishman lost. It's one of the most one-sided massacres in military history. A victory so complete, so devastating, that even the English themselves can barely believe it. Henry V, the 28-year-old king who should have died surrounded and desperate on French soil, has just secured his control of Normandy. He's just proven that he can defeat France on its own territory. He's just become the most feared king in Europe. But Agincourt was not just a battle. It was a turning point. A moment that fundamentally changed how warfare would be fought for the next 200 years. Because what died in the mud of Agincourt was not just 10,000 French soldiers. What died was the very idea of medieval chivalrous warfare. The belief that noble knights in plate armor were invincible. That birth and nobility mattered more than tactic and terrain. That heavy cavalry was the supreme weapon of the battlefield. All of this was destroyed in 3 hours. By Welsh commoners with longbows, by mud and terrain. By a commander who understood that the armor meant to protect could be transformed into a prison. The longbowmen, common men without nobility or titles, proved decisively superior to feudal knights. Projectile weapons, not hand-to-hand combat, were the future. Massed firepower, not individual heroic charges, would win battles. And above all, Agincourt proved that terrain, climate, and environment could be weapons as powerful as steel. That understanding the battlefield mattered more than sheer numbers. That leveraging the environment against your enemy could overcome impossible odds. French military leadership was so devastated that they couldn't mount an effective resistance for more than a decade. The next generation of commanders was dead or captured. The men who should have replaced them didn't exist. French nobility had bet everything on their armor and their cavalry charges, and they lost. Agincourt entered legend as the place where cavalry died in the mud, where the medieval age of chivalrous combat came to an end, where 6,000 starving and desperate men destroyed 25,000 of France's finest warriors, and all because Henry V understood something fundamental about warfare. That the best weapon isn't always the sharpest or the heaviest. Sometimes the best weapon is knowing where to fight, when to fight, how to make the very terrain fight for you. The French entered Agincourt confident in their numerical superiority, in their superior armor, in their martial tradition. They believed they could simply crush the English through brute force. That 200 meters of mud didn't matter against 60 pounds of plate armor. They were wrong. The armor that should have made them invincible turned them into stationary targets. The mud that should have been merely an inconvenience became a deadly trap. The terrain they ignored became their executioner, and the peasant archers they despised became their assassins. Agincourt teaches us that victory doesn't come from strength or numbers alone. It comes from understanding your environment, from using every advantage, however small, from turning an enemy's weaknesses into weapons against them. French nobility drowned in their own armor, literally. Men who spent their entire lives training for war, who invested fortunes in equipment, who came from military lineages stretching back centuries, died suffocated in the mud because they didn't understand the battlefield. And Henry V, a young king commanding a starving and exhausted army, won because he understood. Because he positioned his men on the right ground. Because he forced the enemy to fight on his terms. Because he made the environment work for him. When you visit the Agincourt battlefield today, it's still farmland. It's still flat. It still becomes waterlogged when it rains. And if you close your eyes, you can still imagine it. Thousands of men in heavy armor trying to cross 600 feet of deep mud. Arrows falling from the sky like steel rain. The sound of men screaming, suffocating, dying trapped in their own armor. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threat in battle doesn't come from the enemy. It comes from the very terrain beneath your feet, from the weight you carry, from the assumptions you make. The promise of the title was fulfilled. 6,000 starving archers truly erased French nobility. Not metaphorically, literally. The entire warrior elite of the nation. An entire generation of military leadership eliminated in 3 hours. And they drowned in armor. Exactly as promised. Not in water, in mud. Under the weight of 60 pounds of steel that should have protected them, but became their death sentence. October 25th, 1415. The day medieval warfare died in French mud. The day peasant archers proved superior to noble knights. The day terrain became a more deadly weapon than any sword. Agincourt is remembered not merely as a battle, but as the end of an era. The moment when chivalrous cavalry, the ideals of noble combat, the supremacy of heavy armor, all of it ended. Sunk in the mud, pierced by arrows fired by common men, defeated by tactic, terrain, and environmental understanding. And the lesson remains, that no matter how strong you are, how well equipped, how superior in numbers, if you don't understand the terrain, if you don't respect the environment, if you believe that brute force is enough, you will sink, just like 10,000 Frenchmen sank at Agincourt, trapped in their armor, betrayed by their confidence, destroyed by their own arrogance. And the Welsh archers, men without titles or fortune, stood on top of the hill and watched, because they understood something that French nobility did not understand. That sometimes, the best protection isn't steel. It's knowing where you're standing. So what impossible military victory should we cover next? What other moment in history where seemingly insurmountable odds were beaten by brilliant tactics and environmental understanding? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Because history is full of battles where genius defeated strength, where the weak conquered the strong, where terrain decided everything. And Agincourt? Agincourt is just the bloodiest reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can wear is armor you don't know how to take off, especially when you're sinking. 80